The news broke like a thunderclap. Phones rang off the hook. Inboxes flooded, and TV anchors struggled to contain their disbelief. Bernie Madoff has been arrested for running the largest Ponzi scheme in history, the headlines screamed. A cold December morning in New York turned colder for thousands of investors who watched their life savings vanish. In seconds, Martha Levine, 67, stared blankly at her computer screen, her retirement statement showing zero. "It can't be real," she whispered. Across town, hedge fund managers shouted into phones, demanding answers. Oh. Lifetime of trust vaporized overnight. Financial advisors wept. Families turned on each other. He was the safest bet in town, someone muttered on Wall Street. But there were no safe bets left. Only ashes. In that one moment, faith in the system shattered. Not just portfolios, futures were destroyed. And at the center of it all stood a man who once embodied trust. Long before the headlines, Bernie Madoff was a name whispered with admiration on Wall Street. To many, he was the gold standard, a pioneer, a mentor, even a friend. His firm promised steady, modest returns. No fireworks, no drama, just calm, assured growth. The kind of returns you told your friends about with pride. "You're with Madoff? Lucky," they'd say. Celebrities, charities, and ordinary retirees all lined up to be part of his exclusive club night. But it wasn't the numbers that lured them. It was the trust. Madoff exuded confidence, control, class. A man who shook hands like a senator and smiled like a grandfather. He was the safe harbor in volatile markets. In a world of risk, Bernie was certainty. But beneath that polished surface was something else, something that no one saw coming. At first it was hard to believe. A Ponzi scheme? From Bernie? No. He was on the NASDAQ board. He hosted charity galas. He wore Rolexes, but gave generously. People searched for another explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a setup, an accounting glitch. "It's not true," one client cried into a live mic, tears streaking her face. But as the truth solidified, denial turned to rage. The SEC had investigated him before and found nothing. How could this have gone unnoticed for so long? Every letterhead, every monthly statement, it was all fake? The anger swelled, not just at Madoff, but at a system that let it happen. What made it hurt the most wasn't the money, it was the betrayal. Madoff didn't just scam strangers. He destroyed friends, colleagues, even family. He hosted weddings, sponsored hospitals, held babies, all while lying through his teeth. One investor said, "He sent my daughter a teddy bear when she was born." That same year he faked our statements. The emotional wreckages spread far beyond spreadsheets. It tore through trust, dignity, identity. "I wasn't stupid," another man whispered. "I believed in him." Belief became poison. Faith, a trap. No spreadsheet could tally the grief he caused. As the magnitude of the crime unfolded, people searched for signs they missed. The spotless returns, the vague strategies, the reluctance to answer questions. "We should have known," a journalist wrote. But hindsight is cruel. Madoff's lie was perfect because it appealed to hope. The goal. Hope of security, of stability, of something real in a world of illusion. He didn't take risks, he took hearts. He sold the fantasy that money could be safe. And in doing so, he robbed people of more than wealth. He stole their sense of safety. It was only Act 1, But the damage was already eternal. Long before the collapse, long before the lawsuits and ruined lives, there was just a young man from Queens with ambition in his eyes. Bernard Lawrence Madoff wasn't born into power. He built his legend brick by brick. In the 1960s, he founded his firm with a modest $5,000 saved from lifeguarding and installing sprinklers. "I just wanted to make something of myself," he once said. The early years were lean, uncertain. But Bernie was relentless. He understood systems. He read markets like novels. While others played by the book, he wrote his own. Friends watched him rise with a strange mix of admiration and envy. He dressed sharp, spoke smoothly, and always carried an air of certainty. Madoff always looked like he knew something you didn't, a peer would later say. And most of the time he did. Bernie didn't just build a business, he built a brand. Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities became a symbol of quiet success. It wasn't flashy, it was exclusive. Word of mouth only. If you had to ask, you didn't belong, joked one investor. By the 1980s, Bernie had grown into a powerful figure helping pioneer computerized trading. He was at the forefront of wall innovation while remaining elusive. His office on the 17th floor was the Sanged Honeycomb over BC, a respectable face. The 18th floor, the secretive investment advisory unit, would later become infamous. That floor was locked, always, an employee once confessed. But no one asked questions. They were too busy cashing their steady, reliable returns. His myth grew stronger with every check cleared, every calm statement mailed. Madoff's client list read like a guest list at an elite Hollywood stars, European royalty, professors, politicians, and non-profit organizations. But he wasn't loud about it. That was the genius. He let others do the boasting. Madoff's people don't advertise. A retired banker told his neighbor, they don't need to. The secrecy added allure. And Bernie knew how to play the part. Impeccable manners, thoughtful gifts, and the occasional well-placed favor. His charm wasn't loud, it was calculated. He made you feel like the smartest person in the room for choosing him. One client recalled. That wasn't just salesmanship. It was seduction. A soft-spoken trust. Weaponized. And once you were in, you didn't leave. You brought friends. But while Bernie dazzled clients upstairs, something darker stirred below. The famed split-strike conversion strategy was a masterstroke. A financial jargon, complex enough to deter questions, simple enough to trust. He claimed to trade blue-chip stocks with precision timing, hedging perfectly. The results? Remarkably consistent, even during volatile markets. Too consistent. But consistency is comforting, and few dared to challenge it. The actual trading floor, when visited, looked the part. Phones rang. Terminals blinked. Employees moved with purpose. Yet behind the scenes, the trades weren't happening. Statements were manually fabricated. It wasn't an algorithm. It was a copy machine. The illusion was so flawless it became real, even to those who should have known better. It didn't start as a scam, not at first. At least, that's what some believe. Maybe it began as a stopgap, a temporary fix, a lie meant to protect, then repeated to survive, and then normalized. Over time, the fraud became a parallel reality, one that required more lies, more money, silence. At a certain point, even he must have believed it, an investigator would later muse. Bernie built a machine that fed on trust, and he couldn't stop it anymore. It had to grow or collapse. And he chose growth. The man who, once revolutionized Wall Street had become its ghost, a phantom success hiding in plain sight, wrapped in silence, protected by reputation, driven by the full, terrifying momentum of a lie too big to unwind. At its peak, Bernie Madoff's empire was moving billions. But behind the numbers there were no trades, only ledgers of fiction. The scheme was simple yet devastating. New money paid old promises. As long as fresh investors lined up, the illusion lived on. Bernie's inner circle on the 17th floor called it the magic. They printed statements showing impossible returns and sent them off with the confidence of seasoned professionals. No trades were actually made, but every detail was perfect. Cusp numbers, transaction dates, fake purchase prices. One employee later said, "It was like producing a Broadway show every month, scripts, sets, and applause included." But Madoff knew the danger. He knew that one bad season, one wave of redemptions, would tear the curtain down. Still, he pressed on. The lie was now too big to confess. So he kept performing. Whispers of suspicion began to ripple. A few sharp-eyed analysts noticed the two consistent returns. "It's not possible," one hedge fund consultant said, scratching figures into his notepad. Enter Harry Markopoulos, a financial investigator who smelled fraud from the first graph. "It's mathematically impossible," he told the SEC again and again. But they didn't listen. Over 9 years, Markopoulos submitted report after report, calling it a Ponzi scheme in bold letters. Nothing came of it. The SEC remained passive, lulled by Madoff's reputation and polished charm. Bernie was untouchable until he wasn't. But even then, the silence was deafening. "He's too powerful," one insider whispered. "No one wants to pull that thread." Inside the firm, cracks formed. Employees began to question. "Why don't we ever see the actual trades?" someone asked. But Madoff deflected with authority. "It's proprietary," he'd say with a half smile. And for most, that was enough. The culture inside was built on fear and loyalty. Dissent wasn't welcome. You were either part of the magic or out in the cold. Staff member would later say. The 18th floor remained sealed off, physically and psychologically. Employees rode the elevator past it without daring to look. Meanwhile, those inside the inner circle knew too much. Some justified it. Others drank more. A few kept folders, insurance policies, for a day they feared would come. Markets fluctuated, economies trembled, but Madoff's numbers never blinked. That, ironically, became his greatest weakness. In 2000, during the dot-com crash, and again in 2001 after 9/11, his portfolios remained untouched. How did he avoid the storm? Analysts asked. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't have to. Trust shielded him. His investors were fiercely loyal. "If Bernie says it's fine," one said on record. But behind the scenes, redemptions grew harder to cover. He needed more money. Always mine. More. Private meetings with feeder funds became desperate. He promised exclusivity, hinted at closing the fund soon. Urgency as bait. The system had become an addiction, and Bernie was the supplier. Pressure surged. Behind the smiles and polished exteriors, Madoff was unraveling. The weight of sustaining the fraud seeped into his family life. His wife, Ruth, noticed the sleepless nights. His sons, Andrew and Mark were kept in the dark but sensed a distance. Bernie's world was a fortress of secrets, and even at home, walls rose high. "Everything okay?" Ruth asked one night. "Just tired," Bernie replied. But the silence deepened. Meanwhile, whispers outside grew louder. More inquiries. More redemptions. The machine groaned under its own weight. And yet, Bernie kept walking into his office, tie straight, voice calm. The mask never cracked. Not yet. It began at the dinner table. December 2018. The markets were crashing, investors were panicking, and redemptions flooded in faster than faster. Bernie could cover. That night, he sat across from his sons, Mark and Andrew. Their firm had kept them separated from the investment advisory side, but they sensed something was wrong. Bernie looked tired. He barely touched his food. Finally, he set down his fork and said, "I have something to tell you." Silence followed. Then, with a trembling voice, he said, "It's all a lie. It's all one big lie, dit why." The room froze. His sons stared in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Andrew asked. Bernie repeated it. "The whole business. It's a fraud. I'm finished." The air thickened. The weight of decades collapsed in a single breath. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was blood deep. The next morning, Mark and Andrew did what Bernie never expected. They turned him in. They walked into their lawyer's office, eyes rimmed red, and recounted everything. "Our father just confessed to running a multi-billion-dollar fraud," Mark said, barely able to form the words. Within hours, federal authorities mobilized. Mobilized. Bernie Madoff, the king of calm certainty, was arrested in his penthouse in broad daylight. Cameras waited outside. His hands trembled as they were cuffed. Reporters screamed questions. "Do you regret it? How long?" But Bernie said nothing. Not a word. The man who once ruled Wall Street was let out like a criminal. Because that's what he was. Wed. His empire wasn't built on innovation. It was built on trust. And it shattered with the snap of a plastic zip tie. As Bernie sat in custody, the world reacted. Phones rang endlessly at investment firms. Charities scrambled. Foundations collapsed. Overnight. The Elie Wiesel Foundation, the Steven Spielberg Foundation, both victims. "It's like watching your house burn down," one victim said. "Only slower." Newspapers ran with one-word headlines. Fraud. Wall Street's golden idol had crumbled. Inside his own firm, employees wept and cursed. "He ruined us all," one shouted. But the greatest damage wasn't financial. It was psychological. Madoff had corrupted trust itself. People who prided themselves on discernment felt duped. And that shame spread faster than the headlines. What finally triggered the collapse wasn't regulators or journalists. It was panic. The 2008 financial crisis sent shockwaves, and clients rushed to pull their money. Over $7 billion in redemption requests hit Bernie's desk in 1 week. But the cash wasn't there. It never had been. He tried buying time, called loyal clients, made empty promises. But the facade was crumbling. "This is the end," he muttered to himself. He knew it. There was no more hiding. The monster he created had grown too large to feed. The irony? If the markets hadn't collapsed, he might have lasted longer. But the storm outside finally exposed the rot within. The timing wasn't just poetic. It was fatal. After the arrest, the fallout intensified. FBI agents seized records, computers, and entire floors of evidence. The 17th and 18th floors of Madoff's firm were now crime scenes. Clients gathered outside the building, many in tears, others furious. "He was our friend," one said. "He came to my wedding." Reporters captured it all. Inside, investigators uncovered the full scale, up to $65 billion in fake account balances. It wasn't just theft. It was a betrayal stitched into thousands of lives. Bernie sat in silence, not fighting, not denying, just waiting, as if the performance was finally over, and he had no more lines to speak. They didn't hesitate. After their father's confession, Mark and Andrew Madoff contacted authorities. That decision, made in a heartbeat, would forever define their legacy. The sons were clear. They had no part in the fraud. But to the world, the name Madoff was now toxic. In the hours that followed, Bernie was arrested, charged, and placed under house arrest. As he sat in silence, his sons faced the cameras. "We're devastated," Andrew said. Their mother, Ruth, watched from the shadows, her world collapsing. "He lied to all of us," she whispered later. The betrayal split the family. Trust shattered like glass. For years, Bernie had protected his secret behind polished walls. Now, he had nowhere left to hide. His greatest performance had ended, with his own children pulling the curtain down. The courtroom was packed. Victims sat shoulder to shoulder, some holding photos, others clutching ruined statements. Bernie entered slowly, hands shackled, face blank. No smug grin, no calm charisma, just the hollow eyes of a man undone. "Your Honor," he said, "I'm here to accept responsibility." It was the first time he admitted it in public. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge, cold and focused, listened. Prosecutors detailed the scope of the crime, thousands defrauded, billions lost. "This is not just a white-collar crime," the prosecutor said. "It is a nuclear-level financial assault." Madoff didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to fall. Outside, Wall Street reeled. Confidence collapsed. The markets shook, not because of numbers, but because of trust. Financial advisors scrambled to reassure clients. Politicians pointed fingers. Regulators defended their blind spots. But the damage was done. Protesters gathered with signs reading, "Madoff, kook monster." Former friends distanced themselves. Country clubs revoked memberships. Why? The man once treated like royalty now wore the mask of a national disgrace. One analyst said, he wasn't just a fraud. He was a reflection of all our blind ambition. The entire system stared at itself in the mirror and saw the cracks. Madoff may have fallen alone, but he took the illusion of infallibility with him. Then came the reckoning. On June 29, 2009, Bernie stood before the court for sentencing. The room held its breath. The judge didn't hold back. Extraordinary evil, he called the crime. Survivors testified. Some cried. Others trembled with rage. "He stole my future," a retiree whispered. "He stole my son's college fund," another shouted. Then came the words that echoed around the world. "I sentence you to 150 years in federal prison." Gasps, Some cheered. Others wept. Bernie nodded, almost gratefully. For the first time, mask cracked, and beneath it, a tired, broken man remained. The world had finally said what he never could: enough. As the gavel fell, the final chapter of Madoff's public life began. He was led away in silence, the courtroom watching every step. Behind him, the wreckage smoldered, thousands of lives upended, generations impacted, a faith system dismantled. But something else lingered, something quieter than show. Outrage, grief, and the grief of being fooled, of believing in something that never was. Ruth Madoff retreated from the world. Mark would die by suicide 2 years later. Andrew would lose his battle with cancer. The cost went beyond money. It took lives, trust, and futures. Bernie Madoff vanished into the prison system, ideal, swallowed whole. And still, the world whispered his name, not in reverence, but in warning. They came to speak, broken but unafraid. One by one, victims stepped into the light of the courtroom and told their stories. A widow who lost her husband's pension. A Holocaust survivor whose life savings vanished. A couple who had to sell their home. Their words were not just testimony. They were elegies for lives unraveled. "I trusted him with everything," one woman whispered, "and now I have nothing." Others trembled with rage. "He ruined my father's legacy." They didn't seek vengeance, they sought acknowledgement. And in the center of it all, Bernie Madoff sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't interrupt. He didn't explain. Because there was nothing left to say. The legal battles stretched on. Forensic accountants clawed through fake statements tracing the untraceable. Trustees were appointed to recover funds, selling yachts, seizing assets, pressuring feeder funds to return stolen millions. The process was grueling. Some money came back. Most didn't. "There's no spreadsheet for what we lost," said one victim. And yet, piece by piece, the legal system began stitching together a path toward compensation. Irving Picard, the trustee, became a quiet hero, hunting every last dollar. "We'll find it," he promised. But justice moved slowly. And for many, it was too late. Their golden years had been swallowed by illusion. And illusion left nothing behind. Inside the Madoff family, grief mutated into silence. Ruth Madoff withdrew from public life. Her accounts were stripped down to essentials. She lost friends, status, and the illusion of her husband's world. She claimed she never knew, but few believed her. Mark, the eldest son, couldn't bear the weight. On the 2nd anniversary of Bernie's arrest, he hanged himself in his apartment, his 2-year-old son sleeping in the next room. "Need a hate him," he had once said. He destroyed everything. Andrew battled cancer, declining quietly. He too would be gone within years. Madoff's name had become a scar across an entire bloodline. Not all punishment is handed down by judges. Some, the soul delivers. The financial world responded with self-reflection and denial. New regulations were passed. The SEC vowed reform. Compliance officers were hired in droves. But beneath the surface, many whispered, it could happen again. Because the truth wasn't just about Bernie. It was about all of them, about how easily greed dressed itself as genius, how reputation replaced scrutiny. Madoff didn't steal, one commentator wrote. He was given. Investors handed him their trust willingly. And that's what stung most, realizing the system didn't fail them. They failed themselves. The lesson wasn't written in ledgers. It was written in caution, trust but verify, or pay the price in silence. Behind prison walls, Bernie Madoff lived in shadows. He aged quickly, once a titan, now a frail inmate. He gave occasional interviews, offered apologies, claimed remorse, but no words could rewind time. His world shrank to a cell, a plastic tray, and memories of a life built on fiction. "I'm too. Thought I could fix it," he once told a reporter. "But I couldn't stop." He died in April 2021 at age 82, alone, anonymous, surrounded by concrete. There was no grand ending, no final revelation, just silence. The man who sold certainty died in obscurity, and perhaps that, finally, was justice. Not a verdict, but a vanishing. The prison walls kept Madoff locked away, but his name lingered. Like smoke, he aged quickly, moving through the system with little contact. Fellow inmates called him the Wizard, some with mockery, others with quiet reverence. He gave interviews, always calm, measured, and oddly composed. "I'm too betrayed my investors," he said, "and I betrayed my family." He never asked for forgiveness. He never tried to earn it. And perhaps that was the last act of honesty he ever gave. In 2020, his lawyers filed for compassionate release. He was dying of kidney disease. The court denied him. In April 2021, he died alone in a federal prison in North Carolina. No family beside him. No legacy but the ruins. The man who once made billions disappear vanished quietly into history. His death wasn't met with sympathy. For most, it passed as a headline and faded by evening. But for the victims it stirred up buried grief. "He stole decades from me," one woman said, "and I still feel the hole." Others felt nothing at all, just the tired dullness of wounds that never quite healed. Some had rebuilt, brick by brick, others never recovered. Trust, once shattered, never returned fully. And yet, life went on. Grandchildren were born, homes were downsized but warmed again. Laughter, cautious but real, returned to some dinner tables. The world moved forward. But every so often, a name, a number, a memory would drag the past back. Madoff was gone, but the consequences lived on, in every spreadsheet, in every cautious handshake. The financial world built new walls, but the same cracks remained beneath the paint. Scandals continued. Loopholes reappeared. Greed found new disguises. But Madoff's name became a benchmark, not of success, but of scale. "It's the biggest fraud since Madoff," they would say. Business schools dissected the scandal. Books were written, films produced, and documentaries streamed. But beneath all the media, one truth remained unshakable: trust is fragile. It's given freely and broken forever. Bernie didn't just con people out of money. He rewrote what caution meant in the modern world. And in doing so, he forced a brutal truth to surface. Even the smartest minds can be deceived when comfort wears the mask of competence. Some survivors chose silence. Others chose to speak. From the full ashes of financial ruin, advocacy groups emerged, campaigning for transparency, regulation, and justice reform. They shared their stories not to dwell in pain, but to protect others. One former investor founded a nonprofit to teach financial literacy. "I can't undo what happened," she said, "but I can help someone else avoid it." These were the quiet victories. Not dramatic, not televised, but real. People healing, through purpose. While Madoff faded into infamy, these voices grew stronger. They weren't seeking fame. They were reclaiming control, one classroom, one family, one conversation at a time. And so it ends, not with a bang, but a quiet understanding. Bernie Madoff's story wasn't just about numbers. It was about trust, illusion, and the cost of looking away. In the beginning, he promised safety. In the end, he delivered devastation. But from that devastation came lessons etched deep into the fabric of finance, family, and human nature. He was not a monster. He was a man, deeply flawed, dangerously convincing. The final word doesn't belong to him. No. It belongs to those who endured, who rebuilt, who refused to be defined by what was stolen. This story, like the scheme, was built on belief. And now, with the truth laid bare, it belongs to the world, not as a warning but as a reminder. Believe wisely.